very good morning, and thank you for coming out on a Monday morning. Not the best, the easiest time to attend seminars, but I think it's a measure of the interest of the topic, and I think the interest in our speaker that you all are here. We are going to be sort of talking about public attitudes behind the rise of populism in Europe and the United States, and there'll be some stuff on India as well towards the end. I first want to begin by thanking Sabina Diwan of Just Jobs Network, without whom this would not have been possible, for putting us in touch with Bruce. But most of all, we are really privileged to have Bruce Stokes, who's director of the Global Economic Program at the Pew Research Center. The Pew Research Center needs no introduction. I mean, this is about as authoritative a source as you can get on public attitudes. Globally, they have a credibility and reputation that would be the envy of any institution, doing what is methodologically a very difficult job, which is sort of gauging public attitudes. And I think for the record, it has to be said that before the 2014 election, they were probably the only ones that actually gave us a sense of the direction in which the wind was blowing much before anybody else here, and perhaps much more accurately. So we are really privileged to have you, Bruce, and thank you so much. I mean, I know the demands on your time and the interest in what you're doing, but what Bruce is going to be talking about is arguably one of the most important political questions of our time, which is, there is something we are calling populism, and perhaps in the course of the discussion it will also become apparent what we mean by that. But whatever this thing is, has I think created a political convulsion across the United States, Europe, and arguably even India, whose reverberations are going to be felt for a very long time to come. We don't know where all the chips are going to fall. And to help us think through conceptually what we are looking at in the rise of populism, glad Bruce is here. I know, Sabina, do you want to say something about Bruce, and then I'll hand it over to Bruce. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making time to be here. And of course, I also wanted to thank CPR. It's really a privilege for the Just Jobs Network to be partnering with the Center for Policy Research, and I am grateful to Pratap and Partha for making that happen. So thank you. And before I come to Bruce, who I have many wonderful things to say about Bruce, I thought I would just take a second to introduce the Just Jobs Network, because I'm sure that many of you here are not familiar with my organization. So Just Jobs Network is a global think tank that focuses on, as Pratap said, one of the most pressing questions of our time, which is how do you create more and better jobs worldwide? And I think that this question is actually at the heart of the rise of global populism. I think what we are seeing today is a desire on the part of people for good jobs, for better jobs, for economic opportunity and better economic mobility. And I think that the rise of global populism, whether one attributes that to a manifestation of the effects of globalization and capitalism, or to the failure of institutions to deliver better, more equitable outcomes for citizens. Either way, I think what we're seeing is kind of a dangerous phenomenon, a mainstreaming of fringe dogmas. And the thread runs from Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia through the Occupy Wall Street movement to the rise of Donald Trump in the US. And I also think that India is now confronting India has its own brand of global populism, from AAP and Kejriwal to, the son of a chaiwala becoming prime minister. And so to shed light on these issues, it is my privilege to also welcome Bruce Stokes, who is the director of the Global Economic Attitudes Project for the Pew Research Center. And Bruce in the past has also been a senior fellow with the Center on... My seat keeps going down. I'm just going to stand up, finish, and then I'll switch my seat. Bruce has also been a senior fellow. Thank you. Thank you. That's better. I can project though, so that's okay. Bruce has also been a senior fellow for the Council of Foreign Relations, and he was an economics correspondent for the National Journal in the United States. And it is my honor to also say that Bruce Stokes is a part of the advisory group for my organization, the Just Jobs Network. So with that, Bruce, I turn it over to you to please shed some light on the rising global health crisis.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for coming out here. I really look forward. The reason I like to do these presentations is the conversation that the numbers stimulate. Numbers are boring, but they often stimulate a lively conversation. So I'm going to throw up a lot of numbers here on the screen. I urge you to interrupt me. This should be a dialogue, not a lecture, if only because if you say at the end of this, gee, back on slide 15, there was a number here I don't understand, we'll never get anywhere. So let's if there's something you see on the screen up there that troubles you, interests you, whatever, interrupt me and we'll make this a conversation. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about our global research on economics-related issues, because it does seem to me that there is a great deal of data in there that suggests some of the motivators for the rise of populism. I dare say that the election of Modi might have actually been a precursor of this. That India may have been leading rather than following the West and the kind of populist sentiments that were voiced by the public. I would caution you, however, that I do think that because my guess is most of the people in this room were trained in economics, we tend to believe that all things are based in economics. We're all children of Karl Marx at some level, in the sense that economics can explain everything. And that's not to say that if all of our economies weren't doing better, that maybe some of these problems wouldn't exist, or they'd be better to manage. But I do think that at least I can firmly, I think, say this in both Europe and the United States. Economics is only one explanation for this. I think that the pace of change in modern life is another issue that we have to grapple with. When we ask people around the world, do you think that life is moving too fast, they universally say yes. When we ask people, do you think your traditional way of life is threatened, everyone in every country says yes. We don't know quite what that means. I don't think they know quite what that means. There's just a feeling of unease. And I can certainly tell you in the US that unease touches on a variety of issues, from the emerging role of women in society, to the emerging role of minorities in the society, to the fact that gay people now are out of the closet and want to get married, a whole range of issues that I think these public opinion surveys pick up the unease. And how we grapple with those is, I think, obviously not simple. And we should not, I think, deceive ourselves that finding economic solutions to the economic problems that our societies face will make everything fine again. I think that again, my belief, being trained in economics, is that all this would be more manageable if we were growing faster and there was better distribution of income, etc. But I don't think that that we should deceive ourselves that this is purely an economic phenomenon. I think that there's a broader sense of unease out there in our populations that I would ascribe to the fact that there is a significant minority in most of our populations that are having trouble dealing with the change that comes with modern life. And we should remind ourselves, the fact that you are in this room, that I am in this room, we are the winners in this new society. We have somehow figured out how to thrive in this period of rapid change. We're talking about average people some of whom tell us they have not thrived, not only economically, but psychologically. They're having trouble dealing with all of the various social and ethical, economic and demographic changes that we're going through. And I think that's one of the challenges we all face together. Pew Research Center is based in Washington. We're nonprofit, nonpartisan. We do surveys all over the world. All of our material is available on our website. Most importantly, it's searchable and it's free. So if you have never had a chance to go to the Pew website, there's a lot of information there. I'm going to touch on only a small part of it. We do more surveys on Hispanics in America than any other people in the United States. We do more surveys on religion around the world than anybody else does. In fact, we're thinking of doing a survey in India on religious practices and beliefs, which would be, I think, a very interesting survey if we can pull it off. We have a big survey coming. We do surveys every week on American political attitudes, and in the run-up to the election, you can imagine that's terribly interesting. One of the interesting questions we've just gotten from the American public is we ask people, compared with 50 years ago, has life, for people like you, gotten better or worse? Notice that the population, to a slight extent, thinks life has gotten worse, but Clinton supporters say the life has gotten better, and Trump supporters overwhelmingly say life has gotten worse. And basically, Clinton supporters think life is going to get better, and Trump supporters think it's going to get worse. This is one of the defining characteristics in our discussion these days. We, as well as the Europeans, have lost faith in the institutions of a democratic society. The degree of support for government in general is at an all-time low in modern times. I can tell you that Gallup just released data last week on attitudes towards Congress. It was headline making because now 20% of the population has a faith in the Congress. It's up from 13%, so that's a great increase. Needless to say, that's not a good endorsement of Congress. And I can tell you that there's loss of faith in corporations, there's loss of faith in trade unions, a whole degree of institutions. I'm sorry, what?
Obama's managed to stem the fall? Is that the way we read it?
No, I think that
Or it can't fall any further?
For whatever reason, Congress has actually done a few things, but 20% is 20%, and that's really not something to write home about. Basically, Americans believe their side always loses. There's this frustration. Somehow, politics is not delivering for me. This, to my mind, is one of the most disturbing results in our survey work. Basically, 45% of Republicans say the Democratic Party is a threat to the national well-being, and 41% of Democrats say the Republican Party is a threat to the national well-being. Think about the implications of that for a moment. Why would you compromise with the other side if you think it is a threat to the national well-being? This is one of the explanations, I think, of why we can't get anything done. Yes?
Yeah, the previous slide.
Yes.
It's all about losing or winning. There's no compromise there. There's no, oh yeah, we came to a reasonable, I feel that we came to a reasonable compromise.
You're right, but we do multiple questions to try to get a sense of people's attitudes. This was just to get a sense of the attitude that somehow my side's a victim, and we never prevail. You're right. I mean, there are other questions to ask. We have asked other questions about compromise, and what we find is that people say, yes, we want compromise, and then if you ask deeper questions, what you find is, I want my side to prevail. That's my idea of compromise, that my side prevails. This may be one of the more powerful results, I think, in terms of explaining what's going on in the United States today and the Trump phenomenon. 46% of Americans say that the United States is less important and powerful than it was 10 years ago. Only 21% say we're more important and powerful. This, I think, is an explanation for the Make America Great phenomenon in the Trump mantra. We could debate. Arguably, the United States may be less powerful and important than it was 10 years ago in a factual, but the fact that people that's what they feel, it's not at all clear that people think that's a good idea. We asked people about inequality. We asked people about a series of problems. And what we found was that 52% say that the gap between the rich and the poor is a very important problem in the United States. Notice that it's 83% if you say it's very big or moderately big. That is the people's biggest concern going into this election, the domestic concern going into this election, even more than terrorism, certainly more than immigration even, which gets a lot of publicity.
Is the don't know part a big number or a small number?
In that case, the don't knows are very, very small. What we find in India as well, in other places, average people have an opinion about everything. Now, if you ask them, what do you think about South Korea? You're going to get a lot of high don't knows because people don't wake up every morning thinking about foreign countries. They don't feel. But in terms of what are problems, basically people have an opinion. Now, I think the caution we should all exercise when we look at public opinion data that relates to problems is that we find that everybody thinks everything is a big problem. If you give them a list of problems, they are quite likely to say everything is a problem. Now, their intensity is probably what you should look at. Is it a very big problem or somewhat of a problem? But the reality is people tend to have an opinion about their problems, and they tend to, as my wife likes to say, awfulize. In other words, they're concerned about everything. So you have to kind of take all this with a bit of a grain of salt. Yes, I'm sorry.
What about ranking?
Well, the ranking is here in very big. Basically,
No, but if you get the same result, if you ask people to rank,
we don't do that.
different.
We don't do that. It's difficult when you're trying to measure that because people, then you have to read the entire list of them first. They got to remember what was first on the list. It's complicated in administration. Basically, people who support Trump are worried about different things than people who support Clinton. The gap between the rich and the poor is what jumps out. 70% of Clinton supporters think it's a very big problem. Only 30% of Trump supporters think it's a very big problem. What about immigration? You hear a lot about this in the news. Basically, Americans believe immigrants strengthen our country. That's a widely shared view. But there's a huge partisan gap on that. Basically, Clinton supporters believe that immigration is good for the country, and Trump supporters overwhelmingly say it's bad for the country. That's why Trump talks about it. Scrutiny of Muslims. As you know, this has been a big issue. Should we basically monitor Muslims? Basically, Americans say no. By 2-1, Americans say, no, we don't want to do that. But a majority of Trump supporters want to do it. So this is one of the real issues that divides people and leads to the partisanship. Free trade, obviously another big issue. Kind of America's engagement with the rest of the world. Protectionism, what does this mean? As you can see, a majority of Clinton supporters say trade deals are good for the country, and a majority of Trump supporters say no, it's bad for the country. Again, this is one of the policy issues. If there's a new administration, there's going to be support for one thing or the other. The same with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. One of the interesting issues about this trade issue is Americans tend to believe trade is good for the country, but it's not good for them. They believe it lowers wages. They believe it destroys jobs. They believe it doesn't lead to economic growth. And oh, by the way, for those of you who are economists, and you know that only politicians say trade creates jobs and lowers wages. Economists don't say that. Economists say trade is good because it lowers prices. Nobody believes that trade lowers prices. And I can tell you that we've asked this question in 40 countries. Only the Israelis believe trade lowers prices. Nobody else does. And I would caution you. I told this to some trade economist friends of mine, and they said, look, nobody believes that trade lowers prices. And my trade economist, a very prominent trade economist, said, well, I guess we'll just have to tell them again. Look, talking slower and talking louder is not going to do it. The public is telling us that they don't believe trade is good for them.
That's actually very interesting because at least in the US, we think that
Yeah.
huge number of low
Right.
price, I mean the Chinese goods, the low
Oh,
price, all
sure.
of that story.
It doesn't resonate.
It doesn't sort of, and the other thing is that a general trend that there were very few those when you said that were on trade?
Now, this doesn't add up to 100 because you could, a number of people say it doesn't make any difference.
But what I say is the previous one.
Yeah.
When you ask specifically about TPP, then you have a very large
No,
number.
that we haven't heard about, yes.
But if you ask about trade in general,
Yes.
then that number is much more.
Yeah.
Is that true generally, that if you ask for something more specific? then
Yeah,
you-
one of the interesting
Things to watch in trade, in my experience, has been if you ask a principled question, you get a higher number than if you ask a more specific question. So, trade is a perfect example. If you say to people in the United States, for example, or in Europe, is trade good for the country? Just trade. People say, 2/3 of Americans, 3/4 of Europeans say yes, it's good for the country. If you ask a more specific, what about free trade agreements? This is a decision by your government to liberalize markets. There's less support for that. It's only about 50% now in the United States. And then if you ask even more specific question, does trade create jobs? Does it raise wages? Then people, absolutely not. So the more specific the question, the lower the public support. You can see this around environmental issues. You can see it on a variety of issues. So, those of you who work on these issues know how you phrase the question really matters. And I can tell you, our experience has been the more specific the question, the lower the public support, and maybe the higher don't knows. It depends on the question, because then you're getting into specifics. Yes.
Just
Yeah.
2 points. Going back a little, concern about income inequality is only about 10 to 15 years
Yeah.
ago. Earlier, nobody worried about it,
Right.
not even Democrats.
Yeah.
And secondly, the disillusionment with freer trade is also a fairly recent phenomenon because of a degree of decline, a larger degree of decline in American industrial employment.
Yeah.
Because developing countries have, like us, have been skeptical about free trade for a very long time.
But I can tell you, when we have asked people, say in China or Vietnam, does trade create jobs? People say yes. Does trade increase incomes? Yes. And why wouldn't they? I mean, when you look at the job growth in the manufacturing sector in places like China or Vietnam, the growth in incomes in those two countries in the last 10 years, people make the connection. So life experience does matter. And as you say, the life experience in the United States, especially in the manufacturing sector, but also more generally in terms of the stagnation or even decline in median income in real terms, why wouldn't people be upset about this? It is a question that I think policymakers fully haven't integrated as they pursue certain policies, that the public has seen some negative consequences from these kind of public policies. Now, switching to Europe and the populist reaction, I mean, one of the issues obviously is attitudes towards the economy. Things have begun to rebound a little bit in a number of countries, but in Spain, France, and Greece, attitudes still remain horribly negative. 13% say the economy is good in Spain, 12% in France. Germany, not surprisingly, 75% people say the economy, which would suggest to you the rise of the AfD in Germany. Notice, those of you who follow the newspapers, the AfD did very well in the Berlin elections on Sunday. They did very well in the Mecklenburg elections before that. This is not about economics, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second.
The declining United Kingdom is after Brexit?
No, this particular survey was done before Brexit. So you can see there's been rising support for the economy in Britain for the last couple of years. There's a left-right split on the economy, with the left more worried about the economy than the right in a number of European countries. One of the other populist phenomenons in Europe, same you see in the United States, decline in faith of institutions. Basically, there's been a decline in faith in the EU. It began to rebound last year, but it's fallen off again this year, except in Poland. A new issue in Europe in terms of populism has been the perception of diversity. As you can see, we ask people this question: do you think that diversity makes our country a worse place to live or a better place to live, or it doesn't really matter? Notice that in Greece and Italy, a majority of the population say that diversity is bad for the country. This is one of the differences with the United States. When we ask the same exact question in the United States, only 8% of Americans say diversity is bad for the country. As I like to joke, we have drunk the Kool-Aid. We tell ourselves this story that the diversity is good for us, and we believe it. Now, the reality is when you ask more specific questions, to go back to the specific versus the general, we have problems with the aspects of diversity. But in terms of, in theory, the Europeans are having a much more difficult time accepting the fact that Europe is increasingly a set of nations that are nations of immigrants. Yeah.
Just to underscore that point, 88% had unfavorable views as far as the trend on racial and ethnic things were concerned, and also
really?
on immigration. Your own.
Oh yeah, yeah,
early
yeah,
on.
yeah.
So, I mean, again, a very specific question. People
Get exactly. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, right. And again, it's a reminder. It's why you need to ask multiple questions, because one question could conceivably give you a false impression. But notice only 31% of Germans think that diversity is bad for the country. Now that, given right, no, it's surprising to me too.
And Hungary is not Orban is not riding on this huge.
No, I mean it's 4 and 10, but it's not 8 and 10. I agree with you. The German question, it seems to me, bears analysis because it would appear that the Germans, a lot of Germans, because of their history, realize that they can't be against diversity. Now, we don't know that. I mean, one of the problems with survey research, one of the limitations, is you don't know what the respondent was thinking when you ask him this question. You'd need to do a focus group or whatever, and maybe they wouldn't even know. They would just know that, no, I'm supposed to think diversity is good.
But what percent of the sample consists of people who are creating the diversity? The immigrants. Is there a large
No,
substantial immigrant element
we
in that?
don't know that. You would have to have a huge sample size to be able to do that. We just don't. I mean, it's only 1,000 people, so you don't.
Otherwise, it's very
Yeah.
encouraging to have liberal, open-minded people
Yeah.
going up to 30%
Yeah.
in many countries.
Yeah. No. I mean, but bear in mind that this is a society. These are a set of societies that have not historically looked at themselves as countries of immigrants, and now they're having to cope with the fact that they're immigrants. Yeah.
Just one question.
Yeah.
Was this survey done before the Syrian exodus or before?
No, this was after.
After, yeah.
But that's after Brexit.
It was before Brexit, but after the Syrian. Again, and not surprisingly,
There's a wave.
yes.
Those figures also change with specific questions. I mean, does it get worse or?
Well, I'll show you. I mean, we ask a variety of questions.
It's a left-right issue, as you might expect in Europe. Basically, the right is more likely to say that diversity makes our country worse than the left by huge margins. These are statistically significant margins in almost every country. We ask people specifically about refugees. Do refugees increase the likelihood of terrorism? Do they take our jobs and our social benefits? Are they responsible for crime? Basically, the real concern is terrorism. To a certain extent, in some countries, it's the economy. Actually, crime is a minor issue in most countries in terms of their worries. But the median is, 59% on terrorism, 50% on the economy in Europe. So there is this concern. Varies by country. We ask about specific groups: Muslims, Roma, and Jews. What's fascinating to me is that we ask this every year. Despite all the headlines and all the concern and all the examples of anti-Muslim sentiment in Europe, Europeans basically don't like Roma even more. And Roma is a problem they've had for centuries, right? I mean, this is a minority group that's not been integrated for centuries. And there is this prejudice against Roma that you don't even, it even exceeds the prejudice against Muslims. Wide variety of opinion: Italy, Greece, Hungary, Poland, huge anti-Muslim sentiment. Bear in mind that some of these countries have almost no Muslims. I mean, the percentage of Muslims in the Polish society is infinitesimal, which I think we got to remind ourselves that repeatedly what you find in both Europe and the United States is the areas that have the fewest immigrants have the greatest anti-immigrant sentiment. In the United States, the counties that have the lowest number of immigrants are the counties with the highest anti-immigrant sentiment. It's a fear of the other. You know, it's a fear of change. It's a fear of what's different. And that's why I say part of it, this is more than just economics. Yes? We unfortunately didn't. We only polled 10 European countries. Sweden, but not Norway, not Finland, not Denmark. Purely an economics issue. We only have so much money. These things are expensive. Again, as you might expect, huge right-left differences on views of Muslims. Huge statistically significant differences. And yeah.
Is the Greeks are coming out with the most.
We created
That's been there for a while. I mean,
well,
Greeks against Jews, Greeks against Muslims.
The Greeks are an interesting case. We've found for years that over
half the Greek population has an unfavorable view of Jews, for example. So I went to this Greek woman who works for us. I said, "What in the world's going on here? Right? I mean, what's this anti-Semitic sentiment in Greece?" And she's Jewish, it turns out. I didn't know that. And she said, well, because the priests stand up every Sunday in the pulpit and talk about the Christ killers. So I don't know if that's the explanation, but you do see, I mean, the anti-refugee sentiment in Greece, you could kind of understand, maybe explain. They've had to bear this burden of all these refugees. The anti-Muslim sentiment, I don't know enough about, but that was the explanation for the anti-Semitic sentiment. We created a scale of who's the most nativist in Europe. It turns out to be the Hungarians, the Greeks, and the Poles.
The Turks are the national enemy of the Greeks.
Yeah, the Turks are the long-time enemy. So now I'd like to go and talk a little bit about India, if I could. What I'm going to share with you is some data that I admit is a couple of years old, but that's when we've actually asked the most relevant questions. And but I can tell you we have a survey coming out actually at 6:30 tonight. So I can't share with you the data. But I will admit to you we didn't ask as many detailed questions on these issues in this survey. I can tell you that the Indians continue to feel very good about the economy, and in fact better about the economy this year than they did last year, and better this year than 2 years ago. There's a growing positive sentiment about the economy in general. I'm sorry, what?
I said Arvind is doing a good job talking.
Yes, well, whoever. I mean, it is people. Now, it is true though that 74% of the public say that the gap between the rich and the poor is a very big problem. So that's very significant. I would warn you that again, as I said, when you ask people about a problem, they tend to complain. So I'm not saying that the gap between the rich is not a problem objectively, but it also you need to put it in context that if I used to joke about Greece, for example, that if you ask the Greeks about how the sun comes up in the morning, they would complain about it. You know, I mean, it's just people like to complain with or without good reason. Basically, when we have asked people about employment issues, and then as we have done in this survey, basically people think it's a very big problem, and they're frustrated with the government's inability to deal with it. So inequality and employment remain big problems for the Indian public, even though they think the economy's in good shape. I mean, in essence, what they're saying is, yes, I believe the economy is doing well. I'm just not sure I'm doing well.
Sorry to interrupt
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Historically, inequality as such has not been a great concern. It's always been poverty,
Yeah.
the lowest thing. The concern, economists as well as politicians have always treated inequality, they're worried about social inequality.
Yeah.
But income inequality has not in the past
Yeah.
been an important factor in the Indian consciousness.
Right. Well, that's my understanding as well. And I think that, for the most part, in many of our societies, there was this sense that, if you ask me about inequality, I'll tell you I don't like it. But there was a belief in social mobility. There was a belief that you could, at least in the American context especially, the Horatio Alger myth that you could be born poor and die rich. We just know increasingly from the economic studies that have been done in the United States that chances that you're going to be born poor and die rich are decreasingly possible. And one of the challenging political issues, it seems to me, is when the public begins to dawn on them that there is a declining social mobility, economic mobility, do then people get frustrated and they stop believing in the American dream, which is, and I think that certainly in our society, I think possibly in Europe, our data really doesn't tell us much about India. That may be what's happening and fueling part of this populist sentiment. But let me just share with you a couple of the Indian views. Notice that Indian satisfaction with the economy, which was 64% 2 years ago and is better now, was basically better than the median in all other parts of the world. So the Indians, have, relative to the rest of the world, feel good about the economy. Only the Chinese basically are feeling better about the economy. I can tell you again, this year the Chinese feel better about the economy than the Indians. But in terms of expectations, 7 in 10 Indians think the economy is going to get better. This was a couple of years ago, but I can tell you it's the same today. And higher expectations in the rest of the world. I mean, that's both good and bad. I mean, basically, it says we're doing something right to the politicians. It also says to the politicians, there's very high expectations, I better deliver. We asked people about the economy improving. Again, only the Chinese were more optimistic. This is a question we ask all the time. Do you think your children are going to be better off than you are? I can tell you again, this year the Indians overwhelmingly believe their children are going to be better than they're doing. The interesting thing, it seems to me, is compare the Indian experience. About 2/3 say, I expect my children to do better than I am doing. Notice that this is so much higher than other advanced economies, and actually higher than other emerging markets or developing economies. So basically, one of the issues that seems to me around populism is that people in Europe and the United States have lost faith in the future in terms of the economic prospects for their children. And I submit to you that has always been one of the defining characteristics in the past of the West, that the golden age was in the future, not the past. Whereas the Greeks and the Romans, for example, always thought the golden age was in the past. We don't know what the implications of that are. If we in fact permanently, now this is a recent phenomenon since the global economic crisis 10 years ago, but if we permanently believe that the golden age was in the past, what does that mean for society? We're in uncharted territory here. I wouldn't submit that I know, but I don't think it's necessarily good. Yeah.
One on the Bangladesh story.
Yes.
Is the Bangladesh story something that's changed with time?
We haven't surveyed enough in Bangladesh to know. I mean, it's
Is
good.
this 2 year old data? Or
This
is
is
This is
all for other countries
yeah.
also.
But I can tell you the Indian data is comparable to what we're going to
I'm
release
looking
later.
at Brazil.
Brazil,
2 years, this year.
yeah, this was 2 years ago. We didn't survey in Brazil this year. You're right. I would be
Very
surprised, given the conditions. We asked people about their personal lives in India, just to give you a sense of how they, where do you put yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? Percent saying 7, 8, 9, or 10, which is the higher level. 44% of Indians seem happy. That's fairly good compared to developing countries, a little bit lower than emerging markets. I'm sorry, what?
Do you have a gender split for this?
We could look at that. I don't have that with me. If you email me, we could pull it out. I mean, it's interesting. It's always fun to kind of slice this by gender, by age, by income, by education. I must warn you that we find fewer gender differences than I would expect on many questions. I don't know about this question, but I'm always asking our research assistants, give me the gender breakdown, because there might be a good story here. Often there's not. I mean, it's, men and women tend to think of the same about a lot of things. Yeah.
The optimism in the narrations of India being governed by the factor of larger number of youths in this country.
About what? About you?
Larger number of younger people.
Yeah.
Without having the exact data, I think you're right. I mean, we tend to find all over the world, young people are more optimistic about the future. For example, in America, the fact that people don't think their children, the next generation is going to be better off than the current generation, is in part skewed by the fact that people my age are really depressed about the future, whereas young people are more optimistic. Now, the question is that optimism because they're just young and they're naive and they're romantic, or is it because they actually do think that their prospects are better, and it's old people like me who've been frustrated, who maybe see their income stagnate, whose expectations haven't been reached, and so they project that onto the next generation.
This one,
Yes.
this question,
Yeah.
is it more a question of life satisfaction?
Yeah,
or
it
status?
is life satisfaction.
Not
so
status.
It's not status. No. This is a question of we ask people a variety of things about their life. Are you satisfied with your health, with your family life, with your religious life, your social life, safety of your neighborhood, etc.? And this is just how the Indian results compare with other countries in Asia, just to give you a sense. It's lower than some, higher than others. Yes.
Can I just ask you the question? Isn't it just in India? Because I would say that
It is a demographically representative sample, urban and rural.
It matches the demography of India. So the percentage of people in the sample who are 18 to 29 reflects the percentage of people in the population who are 18 to 29. The percentage that's female represents the percentage that's female. So it's a demographically representative sample done door to door throughout the entire country.
and also concerning the income.
And
The income levels also reflected the demographic breakdown of the income stream. Yeah.
It's very narrow range, the Indian response.
yes, yeah.
There's 55 to 69.
No, I agree. Now,
Which, frankly, it may mean that people had great difficulty differentiating these questions. I mean, one of the limitations of survey research is we as intellectuals want really detailed answer to really detailed questions. And you've got to remember, we're talking to average people. They haven't laid awake nights thinking, okay, if somebody comes to my house tomorrow and asks me about the differentiation between my view of my religious life and the quality of my schools, what am I going to say? You get an emotional reaction, right? You don't get a rational response. And I say that arguing very strongly, emotional responses is what you want. You don't want rational responses. We want rational responses because we're researchers. But we have to acknowledge most people don't operate on reason. They operate on emotion. They vote on emotion. They go into the marketplace and buy a blue car rather than a red car based on emotion. And the most, to my mind, and I tell you this as a former journalist who wanted really rational responses to really rational questions, I am now convinced totally what you want in public opinion surveys, for the most part, are emotional responses, because that's where people, the average person, is at. And we have to get over our inhibition that say, well, these people don't know their minds, right? I mean, this response is not rational. We know that in fact there's no inflation, so why are they telling us that that they're worried about inflation? It doesn't really matter whether there's no inflation. If they think there's inflation, that may affect their behavior. And I think that's what we have to learn from public opinion research, that the best questions are ones that evoke emotion, with all their limitations, right? I mean, to give you an example in a U.S. context, 60% of Republicans believe that the unemployment rate has gone up under Obama. 56% of Republicans believe that the stock market has gone down under Obama. We have seen a halving of the unemployment rate under Obama, and we've reached record levels on Wall Street. Now, one could say the Republicans who are asked that question don't understand anything. They don't, they're out of touch with reality. But they're going to vote based, at least in part, on their perception that the unemployment rate has gone up and the stock market has gone down. So what's more important, the fact that they may be out of touch with reality or how they feel? And I would submit to you, if I were Hillary Clinton, I'm worried about how they feel. I'm not worried about how their perception might be out of touch with reality. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't explain that. I find that fascinating.
As George Gallup used to say, you ask people a question and they give you an answer, and you just have to accept the fact that that's their answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Overall, if you see, the satisfaction in religious life is higher in the countries which have a dominant Muslim population. Look at Indonesia,
That's a good
Malaysia,
point. That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Pakistan, and Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Happens to the happily increasing numbers who have no religious life.
Yeah, I mean, that's another issue. I mean, look, you touch on a very important point, and we really don't have data to prove this, and I can tell you that our religious guys actually disagree with me. But we did a survey recently in the U.S. where 40% of Americans said they have changed their religion in their lifetime. And I don't mean they moved from being a Methodist to being a Presbyterian. I mean they moved from being a Jew to being a Buddhist, or a Catholic to being nothing. 40%. And our religious guys say, oh, this is great, we're a marketplace of religious searching, and I'm thinking just the opposite. Religion has historically, for thousands of years, been a pillar of stability in people's lives. And if you tell me that 40% of Americans changed their religion in their lifetime, to my mind, that's a sign of incredible instability and anxiety, potentially. What?
The Catholics will become Protestants.
Well, you could look at this. I don't remember the details. The survey's on our website. But the reality is you have this churning of religious belief, and is that a sign of stability or instability? Yes. I'm sorry, yes.
On your previous point, I
Yeah.
wonder if the analysis can be different in the sense
Yeah.
that I think a lot of people just have a lot of prejudices, and they may be prejudiced against Obama for whatever reasons, his race and so on, but may not be willing to acknowledge any of his achievements. And then when you ask them these specific questions, then that actually helps them explain their prejudice.
I think you're right. I think there's no way to tell whether, if you ask people, does the sun still come up under Obama? You'd have some people say, well, no, of course not. I mean, he's a horror. I mean, you don't know which is the driving factor. Is it because I hate Obama, or I actually think the economy got worse under Obama? And the fact that you put Obama in the question may, in fact, affect the outcome. And look, I think that's one of the limitations of public opinion research. You got to realize you don't know what the respondent hears. You ask them a question, you do your level best to be a balanced question, one that doesn't prejudice the answer, it doesn't put his thumb on the scale. But to give you another example, we ask people every year in the United States, what are the biggest international threats facing the country? And every year, the North Korea nuclear program is near the top. Not the top, but one of the top issues. And look, given what North Korea has done in the last couple of months, that may be totally rational. But long before that, that was the case. And I have argued, but there's nothing we can do about it. Is it because North Korea is in this question or nuclear is in the question? If we ask people, what do you feel about the Ethiopian nuclear program? Would it be very high, right? There is no Ethiopian nuclear program. But the point being, it could be just that the word nuclear is there, and that really scares people. So in fact, next year, we're hoping to ask much more detailed questions of the American public about North Korea, because we got to get behind this and try to get a sense of how worried are you really about North Korea, or is you just worried about nuclear? But let me keep going because we're. Yes. Yeah.
On religion, you said 40% have changed.
Yes.
Changed to what?
Well, no, 40% have changed their religion in their lifetime. And what I mean by that, it's not just they were born a Methodist and they die a Presbyterian. But it can mean that, but it also could mean I was born a Catholic and die an atheist. I was born a Jew and I die a Buddhist. I become a Buddhist or whatever. It just means there's a lot of churn going on. Let's see. Indians seem to be less likely than many others in Asia to say they have personally progressed. Again, this is one of the issues that may underscore some trouble in those headline numbers where people are think the economy's doing well, but they aren't so sure they're doing very well. They're less personally optimistic than many about their own situation. We ask people, what do you need to do to get ahead in life? And we ask this all over the world, in 40 countries. Indians really, really emphasize education as a way to get ahead. Not necessarily working hard, not necessarily knowing the right people, or being lucky. Notice that, the don't knows in China were really high. Maybe we didn't ask about knowing somebody in the Communist Party. I mean, who knows what the explanation is. In terms of views of inequality here in India, 70% say that the gap between the rich is a very big problem. That really hasn't changed compared to what we're going to report later today. It's roughly the same. But it's again, even though I was being cynical and saying you ask people and they'll say everything's a very big problem, Chinese aren't as likely to say that as the Indians. The Japanese certainly aren't. Even the U.S. is not as likely to say that. We asked people what was to blame for the inequality gap in your country. We gave them a range of options. This was not an open-ended question. Frankly, again, this is the limitation of survey research. You give people an open-ended answer, it's impossible to code, and you don't get meaningful answers. Basically, at least 2 years ago, the public blamed the government for inequality. It was government policies that led to inequality. It wasn't the educational system. It wasn't because people don't work hard enough. It wasn't trade, for example. It was basically government policies. But frankly, that's what everybody says. For the most part, everybody says it's government policies. Well, we said workers' pay. Yeah. No, you're right. We did not say because I don't have a job.
How do you distinguish between this?
For example, government economic policy and tax system. I mean,
That's a very valid point. What we were trying to do was not have such a narrow list of things. If we just said government policies, which ones? So we tried to pick out some that we thought people might blame. But you're right, we may have missed them. We may have said, again, this is an art, not a science. Those of you who have written these things know you sit around and you try to figure out what are the best questions. And sometimes you get answers and you say, oh my God, why did we ask it that way? But, you do your best. And Sabina makes a good point. Should we have said, the reason that there's inequality is I don't have a job. I mean, that could have been, and we know that employment is a big issue from other questions we have asked. But that's, it's a valid point.
Should we not have a column saying because of history, this is how we have been. Society is like that.
I can tell you honestly, we didn't think of that, and maybe we should have. That
because as far as I'm concerned, that is how I see it.
yeah, yeah.
We're unequal because we've always been unequal.
Yeah.
The government hasn't created it, not the present creator.
Yeah.
We are the most unequal society that I know of in the world, almost.
But that raises
Leaving out
that raises
the
an interesting
African
question that we didn't think about, which is, should we have also said, you know, this is the way God has ordained it, you know, or I mean, other things that would basically.
I wouldn't bring poor God into it.
Yeah. But you do wonder to what extent some people believe this. I'm destined to this, and you know, which, yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I've asked this question in an open-ended way to many people, and the top two answers that are on there, the biggest one is the rich people,
Yeah.
and the second one is corruption.
Corruption, yeah.
And then when you talk to educated people, it's the system.
Yeah. No, that's a very good
Point. I mean, like I say, I mean, we designed the questions based on our, but that's why I like these conversations, because it says to me, next time you ask this question, you should have different categories, you know. There, I'd have to go back and look. Again, if you want to email me, I can get that for you. The report is on the website, so it may well be in there, but frankly, I wrote it 2 years ago, so I don't remember what those differences were. We asked people, what should you do to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor? And it was a forced choice. Should we tax more because that will help with redistribution, or should we have lower taxes because that'll stimulate the economy? And what's interesting is I can tell you, I expected the average people to say raise taxes because I assumed they would presume, you know, it's not going to be, you're not going to tax me, you're going to tax somebody else. Either they were presuming, no, you'll end up taxing me, and I don't like that, or conceivably, people buy into the kind of Chicago school of argument that lower taxes stimulate growth. Certainly in the U.S., people don't buy into that. The U.K., they don't. Basically, people said raise taxes. But look, in most, not all, but in many developing countries, there was a lot of support for lower taxes. Now, my sense is also there was this cynical sense that if you raise taxes, I'll end up getting to pay. So lower taxes because at least I'll benefit from that. Yeah.
The other story is, what are taxes used for?
Yeah.
And if you believe your government is functioning.
Yes.
Yeah,
No,
exactly. Trust in government is very important.
Exactly. If I don't trust the government, if I believe it'll all be siphoned off through corruption,
Then
or wasted
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, or wasted or
Whichever
whatever.
way.
Yeah.
Waste, fraud, abuse.
Why was there a spike with
I'm sorry, what?
Why was there a spike with
Field
why is
policy.
Brazil such an outlier in this?
Why is Brazil? I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, it would suggest
high.
that
Because
people.
Brazil is very high.
Yeah,
That's
that.
obvious reason.
My guess is it can't simply reflect the marginal tax rate in Brazil, but it goes more to your point.
No, it's all,
Yeah.
also as the whole social protection systems
Yes.
had lots of problems, and
Yeah.
then, you know,
People-
whole bunch
people
of
don't think the
role of
money's
state
used well.
enterprises were seen as favoring an aristocracy.
Yeah. We asked people about the free market system. We ask this question periodically. I can tell you that for the most part, publics all over the world have a faith in the free market system, even though some people are rich and some people are poor. Again, by the way, this is a perfect example of how you wrestle with how to ask the question. We have asked the question, are people offered a free market system, full stop? And basically you get a higher response than if you attach a cost to that system. And in this case we say, well, even though some people are rich and some people are poor. I tend to prefer questions that actually try to give people some sense of the cost of whatever you're asking them. And also the benefits. I mean, but there are values in asking the question either way, it seems to me. Indians tend to believe in the free market system, as do people in most of the rest of the world. Notice the Japanese have lost faith. Yeah.
One quick, you think you're releasing some numbers today and then
the US,
Yeah, yeah.
of course, right? This was 2 years ago. So do you think Indians would be even more pro-free market than the US than they were 2 years ago?
I mean, we don't have any data. I mean, look, given how good people feel about the economy, how they continue to feel very good about Narendra Modi, it would be certainly surprising if these numbers went down.
And US, you think it's trending down?
Nah, I doubt if it's much change. I mean, the reality is, there is a strong philosophical commitment in the United States among Americans to the free market system. Full stop. I know of no evidence that it's lost. And the economy continues to do fairly well. There's not a whole lot of evidence that that's filtered through to people's attitudes. And I don't know if you're aware that last week new evidence came out that the median income in the United States had grown faster last year than since we began to record evidence. And in fact, the fastest growth had been for the bottom half of the population. I don't know of evidence, though, that this is actually translated into people's consciousness in the sense of, oh, I feel better about things. I mean, I can tell you, one of the interesting things about the public opinion data about the economy in the United States is that in our surveys, 28 or 29% of the population say the economy is doing well. Now you'd say, well, gee, that's not very good. That's the highest it's been since 2007. We asked people, is now a good time to find a job in your community? I think even a better question. 41% of Americans say now's a good time to find a job, and they say, gee, that's not very good. That's the highest it's ever been since we started asking the question 3 decades ago. So, how do you interpret that data? I mean, on one hand, it doesn't sound very good. On the other hand, relative to asking the question before, it's very good. And yet you still have this frustration, this populist frustration.
Surprisingly, Japan is the only country in which higher number of people do not believe in free
Yeah, we asked this in 40 countries. I mean, there may be a couple of other countries where, but you can't get 40 countries on a screen.
May I just ask?
Yeah.
How did you pose the question? Because
the question in this case was,
market
are most people, do you agree or disagree, are most people better off in a free market economy even though some people are rich and some people are
poor? What I meant is the term free market economy sort of translates very differently. And I think there were a couple of papers some time ago which said that the same terminology in a different context meant very different things.
Let me give you a small explanation on that. For example, in India, we asked this question in 8 different languages. So every question is translated into the local language, then translated back into English to make sure the translation was correct. We are constantly interacting with the translators because there on occasion people will say, look, there's no word in our language for this, or this won't be understood correctly. Now, it is one of the challenges of transnational public opinion research is that you're constantly going to run into that problem.
I'm not referring to the language issue in terms of the language.
Yeah.
It's the context, how people would say. Yeah. If you asked a question differently, instead of free market, something to do with, say, with level of government interference, you might get a very different.
Yeah, that's
true. So it's the context.
The words themselves are loaded. Free market. Obviously, it's a good thing. If you called it capitalism, it might not be such a good thing.
No.
or globalization.
Right. I mean, for example, but I would warn you. We have tested not so much capitalism versus free market, but we have tested globalization versus trade and foreign investment, and frankly, we don't get much of a difference. Basically, we have asked people, do you think trade's good for your country? And you get what you get. I mean, 3/4 of Europeans say it's good, to 2/3 of Americans say it's good as long as you don't put a price tag on free trade. We've asked people about globalization, thinking, okay, the G word is going to poison the answer. People are going to say, oh, I hate globalization, I like trade, but I hate globalization. No, in fact, people all over the world kind of in theory think globalization is a good thing. Yeah, there's a minority in countries that don't, but for the most part, people buy into this as a good thing. Again, the point is when you ask more specific questions, then the support goes down. Just to give you a sense of globalization, we ask people a variety of questions about globalization's benefits. You know, is foreign companies building new factories in your country a good thing or a bad? This is just worldwide. And it compares India, which is in black, to the answers we got in other countries. And basically you can see that, you know, it varies, basically. Indians are more likely to say that trade creates jobs than people in advanced societies, but slightly less so than people in other emerging markets, and certainly less so than people in developing countries. 49% of Indians think that trade raises wages. Only 25% of people in advanced economies believe that. But actually, people in developing societies are even more likely to say that trade raises wages. In India, it's men, the young and better educated, are more positive about various aspects of globalization. You know, this is not the case across all societies. For example, women in the United States are much more likely to be supportive of trade than men. It is. What?
Why is that so?
What's interesting is this has changed in the United States over time. In the 80s, it used to be women who were more worried about trade and men who were more supportive. Now women are more supportive. The interpretation in the 80s was that women in average households were much more likely to be responsible for the family budget, and they knew that trade meant change, and change wasn't always good, and men were a little bit more irresponsible, and they were welcoming of change, and oh yeah, this will be good for me, and the wife's kind of worried about, yeah, but how are we going to pay for the winter coats for the kids? Now it's flipped, and men are more skeptical than women. I can tell you that young people in India tend to be more supportive of all aspects of globalization than older people. This is what we find all over the world. And the interesting question, which we don't have an answer to, but I think it's interesting to ponder, is it that younger people are more supportive of globalization in all of its aspects because this is the world they were born into? Their worldview was shaped after globalization was a fact of life. And so asking them about these various aspects of globalization is like asking them about the sun coming up. Well, what do you mean? It just is, right? Or are they romantic and naive and they haven't been adversely affected by this and they've only had the benefits of it and they haven't lost a job because of it? And they'll get more cynical as they get older. I can say this, I think, clearly in the United States, that it is old white men who are the most opposed to trade. And this makes total sense when you stop and think about it. They are the demographic group that is most likely to have lost their jobs to manufacturing, are most likely to have suffered a decline in their income and their life expectations. Whereas young people who work in the services area, minorities who also are very supportive of trade, they work in the service, and women to a certain extent, never had those manufacturing jobs to begin with. So it hasn't affected them adversely. The interesting question will be, will that sustain itself over time, or will, as services become more and more internationally competitive, and all of a sudden people in the services sector have to face global competition for the first time in a meaningful way, will their attitudes towards globalization sour as a result? We don't know, but it'll be interesting to watch. But it does seem to me that's one of the challenges going forward. Better educated people are more likely to be supportive of global. I think that's what you'd assume. Upper income people, of course, have disproportionately benefited from it. They've adapted to it in ways that lower income people have not been able to. Again, if you look at individual countries here, Indians are more wary than many others. It's not that they don't think trade is good, it's just they don't necessarily think it's as good as other people do. Does it create jobs? Only half the Indians believe it creates jobs, whereas 67% of the Chinese believe that. 63% of the Indonesians believe that. It is interesting, I think, that only 68% of Indians think that foreign companies building factories in India is a good idea. That's 2/3. That's, you could say that's pretty good. It is lower than the belief in Brazil or Indonesia or roughly comparable to South Africa. And fewer Indians believe that foreign companies buying Indian companies is a good thing. It's a majority still believe it's a good thing, but it's less. That disparity exists all over the world. People are much more opposed to foreigners buying local companies than they are about foreigners building factories, greenfield factories. Now, it makes total sense. I mean, you created jobs where no jobs existed. What's wrong with that? As opposed to you're buying a foreigners buying my company, and God knows what that means. Maybe they'll lay people off, maybe they'll whatever. But I can tell you, do you know who are the two societies that are most opposed to foreign investment in the world? Japan and Germany.
South Korea also, you can include that.
But the Japanese and the Germans, who are some of the biggest foreign investors in the world, are the most wary of foreigners coming in to invest in their country. So it's a fascinating dichotomy, it seems to me.
They're buying companies.
What?
They're most concerned about foreigners buying their companies.
The Germans are most concerned about people buying German companies, yes. And that's universal. I mean, Americans are more concerned about foreigners buying American companies than they are about foreigners building. But overall, the Germans and the Japanese are the most opposed to foreign investment, full stop, in their country. Yeah. And it does the worry about foreigners buying domestic companies is universal, and I do think it is the kind of thing that will increasingly be a source of friction, because it gets to the whole question of is the work culture going to change? Are they going to really just steal our technology? Are they going to exploit us? There's all sorts of things that come into public mind about that. Anyway, we've
thank you, Chris, for
yeah.
absolutely wonderful presentation.